Hey guys, Austin here again with my 10th Paleo-Zoo-Keeper Rant video and follow-up of my last video on the Colossal's dire wolves. And I'm gonna talk to you guys about what I discovered more about them and have some clarifications and some of my thoughts on these as well. As you can see on the title, dire wolf or Jurassic wolf. And also, to make it easier for us all, as I talk in this video, I'm going to refer the dire wolves of Colossal as Jurassic wolves, just to distinguish them from the extinct prehistoric dire wolves. Since this morning, I was able to learn more about these Jurassic wolves, I will call them, and how they were revived and how they were modified. Thanks to both more information that we were able to get from Colossal Biosciences and from commentators down below and on my other videos and videos of others, and Wikipedia even helped with that too. Basically how it goes is that Colossal Biosciences extracted DNA from two direwolf fossils. One that came from a tooth from a direwolf that was found in northwestern Ohio in a cave, which was dated to be 13,000 years old. And the other one from Idaho, an ear bone that was dated to be 72,000 years ago. When they extracted the DNA from these fossils, they basically looked through the genome to see what are the genes that are the core traits of the dire wolf, like what makes a dire wolf in a physiological sense. And then they would basically be able to get the DNA from cells that they were able to extract from the wolf's blood, which is a pretty new, less invasive way of extracting DNA from living animals, which definitely has good conservation implications. Now, anyway, and then once they got the DNA of the gray wolf, they then start to modify the gray wolf's DNA. Now, just to let you know that they didn't exactly insert the ancient DNA into the gray wolf. What they instead did is that using the dire wolf as like a reference, they pretty much modified the DNA of the gray wolf so that the genes can express themselves very similar to that of the direwolf. Now, mind you, like I said, no direwolf DNA was inserted into the gray wolf genome. The genes are basically reprogrammed to behave exactly like the direwolf DNA. Now, this is pretty similar to like how, like a few years ago, genes that are, when they look at over Tasmanian tiger genes, they were said to behave and operate just like the genes of dogs, even though they have no relation to dogs whatsoever. So basically the same thing is for these Jurassic wolves. So basically, these Jurassic wolves are basically dire wolf mimics. Much like how a Tasmanian tiger is a canine mimic, these Jurassic wolves are mimics of the dire wolf. Kind of like how, funnily, that the food convergence, the dire wolf is a mimic of the gray wolf. So definitely a interesting scenario. But okay, anyway, and in the October of last year, two males were born, and then like 3 months or so earlier, for at least earlier by the time this video is being made, a female wolf was born. And even though they did not have any dire wolf DNA in them, they're definitely pretty different than that of a regular gray wolf. Now, the genetic modifications that these wolves received basically resulted in a white coat coloration, a very distinctive vocalizations, that their howling is quite unique. They also had an overall larger body size. Heck, the 6-month-old male dire wolves, or Jurassic wolves, or basically weigh over 80 pounds. This is much big. This is much heavier than gray wolves of a similar age, who normally weigh between 28 and 70 pounds. That's pretty big. They also had a more powerful shoulder structure, a wider head, larger teeth and jaws, more muscular legs. They're when you look at them, even though they are still gray wolves, they are still very different than your average gray wolf. And also, along with that, they also display their normal wolf characteristics: howling, stalking, hunting, wariness towards humans, and so forth. Now, for those who know a thing or two about dire wolves, would definitely know that there's something different and peculiar about these wolves. Huh. Now, as far as those go, the coat color is definitely peculiar. Heck, even my recent my video before this one, I point out on the white coat, the white coloration of the coat, because much like everyone else, I pretty much wasn't certain about the white coat, because we always assumed that the since the direwolf was actually more closely related to jackals and sorry and Maine wolves than gray wolf, we thought their colors would be similar to theirs, but not these white ones. Now, at the beginning, I thought it was probably like a leftover. This was before I knew how they modified the wolves. I thought that the white coat may have been like a leftover from the gray wolf that they did the modifications from. And afterwards, I've learned that according to Colossal Biosciences, they definitely would say that the direwolf from the DNA they found, they had pale fur, pretty light colored fur, and they didn't go for it because, according to them, the original gene for that was going to increase the risk of these wolves developing blindness and deafness. Now, this is definitely pretty understandable, and it's actually something that reassures me because, as anyone who knows me can tell you, that while I do not hate bulldogs, I hate how they were bred. Like, bred traits that look cool but would make their lives miserable. So this is pretty good. But of course, there are people that are saying that, oh no no no, they're just doing that cosmetically so that they can look like in Game of Thrones. Now, one part of me wants to go to that route as well, but then I remembered that the direwolf specimens that they got came from Ohio and Idaho, and when I looked up on where what these places were during the Ice Age, turns out these states were either very close to or partially engulfed by the glaciers that pretty much dominated the majority of Canada during the Ice Age. So it could be possible that, like with Arctic wolves and even Canadian wolves, some wolves have a white. They wolves have a white color. How common it is in that dire wolf population is uncertain, but it could be possible that since they're in areas that have not only glacial ice, but they might even have a lot more have more snow in that region more often, then then a pale whiter coat could be an advantage for hunting in that area. I mean, I'm pretty sure that a dire wolf's coloration that lives in like Idaho is definitely gonna be different than those that live in the San Diego area. That is that has the liberated tar pits, and I'm pretty sure the coloration of a dire wolf in the San Diego region is going to be different than one who lives in Brazil. So, with a species with that much wide range, there could be some coloration differences. Now, instead of using that original gene, they basically used a similar gene to that, which makes white color coats in that of domesticated dogs. So it's basically a safer alternative for the dog than to simply go for that original gene. Now, what's my final say now on these wolves? Now that I know that they're not true direwolves in their whole genesis and whatnot. Well, while I definitely was a bit disappointed that they weren't modified with real genetics, it was still fascinating on how they were modified anyway. I believe that this modification of these wolves can have many multiple implications, and the wolves themselves can even be very useful for future resurrections of the true dire wolves as well. Well, for one thing, with this being able to alter the genes to be able to act in a different manner, this could be able to help with endangered species. In fact, along with announcing these Jurassic wolves that they created, they also announced that they were cloning uh, some wolf dogs so they could be able to help. Red wolves. I mean red wolves. Sorry, they were able to clone red wolves that were found in the wild to have a significant portion of red wolf DNA, more so than most of the other red wolves around, to help with their populations and their gene pool. And are able to use a genetic technology to be able to help the red wolf genome as well. So the technology used to create these Jurassic wolves would be able to help the endangered red wolf. And these Jurassic wolves themselves, well, I definitely think they're still going to be pretty useful. Since even though they didn't really resurrect the dire wolf, they still have the genome of the dire wolf. And it's possible that whenever they decide to resurrect the real dire wolf, there is a good possibility that they could use these Jurassic wolves as surrogates for the true dire wolves, so that they can handle the large birth weight of the true dire wolf pups, since the Jurassic wolves themselves were born from hound crossbreeds, since so that they can compensate for any large sized pups. It could probably work for them too. Of course, if they're gonna go for edit the genome of a canid with the DNA of a dire wolf, like they said they were gonna do with the woolly mammoth, uh, using a more closely related canid like the jackal would definitely be much more useful. With these Jurassic wolves, as we watch them, study them, and see their behavior and such, they could give us a bit of a model to expect when we resurrect the true dire wolves. And if we use them as the surrogates for future true dire wolves, then they could be able to condition the true dire wolves on pack behavior and so forth. Everything can go on from there. For raising animals with other species that are closely related to them brings more success in the behaviors of these animals than just hand rearing them by humans. So, other than calling them Jurassic wolves, what would we consider them in the terms of biology? Well, they're obviously not Anthicynon deerus. I would even call them Canis deerus. If anything, I will call them either between a subspecies, Canis lupus deerus, or even simply an ecotype of Canis lupus. Because since, while they're definitely different than a regular gray wolf, they are still gray wolves. And and currently, they do not have plans on releasing these three Jurassic wolves to the wild. according to them, they're going to stay in their little fenced-in reserve for the rest of their lives. But if they do be introduced to the wild, what will happen? If it's just these three, depending on this context, probably not much, since they haven't been able to show any hunting as far as the keepers are aware. But if they even do, it kind of depends on where they're at. Because remember, even though they are still technically gray wolves, they have the phenotypes that replicate the physical characteristics of that of the dire wolves. They're bigger, stronger, bigger jaws, bigger teeth. So basically, designed to be able to go after large megafauna. If they were stuck in basically a location where it's mostly small prey, and the wolf population there is large, healthy, and diverse, yeah, it's more likely that these wolves are not going to last long, or they'll get absorbed into the group and wouldn't really do that much of a difference. But if they were in an area where there's large prey available, like a large population of bison, mustang, burros, maybe even large species of antelope that are in Texas, and maybe even feral pigs, there's a possibility that there could be a population of wolves that could develop these that could be able to benefit from these dire wolf traits, but they will still not be that much of a difference. But if they were in a situation where there's a good amount of large prey, and the area they are is isolated, and the population of the wolves that are in the area are genetically suffering and limited, they will definitely explode and take hold. We know that could be the case because of a situation that actually happened like this on the Isle Royale. It's a large lake. It's a large island in Lake Superior at the Great Lakes. Basically, for over 100 years, there's been a bit of a study of predator and prey relations there. Moose that got there either by swimming there or introduced there, and then there's a population of wolves descended from a pair of wolves that walked there when the water was frozen. And the scientists have been studying that wolf predator prey dynamics between the wolves and the moose for all that time. At first they thought there was going to be like an equilibrium, but that wasn't happen. The moose population went up and down, and the wolves, while they definitely had a large moose buffet, they had problems because since it only started with two wolves, the genetic diversity was very limiting and not doing so well. And then, sometime later on, a single wolf that was known as the gray one. By he was a big gray wolf. He was able to get to the island from the mainland, and he dominated. Like, he was bigger, he was healthier, he was much more territorial than the wolves on the island, and his genes spread all throughout the island, pretty much dominating everything. Not just him, but his sons and any wolves that had his influence DNA pretty much spread out and dominated the gene pool. Eventually, it did go back to inbreed depression again, but that pretty much shows that in the Isle Royale, if all the male wolves, or at least a good chunk of the male, or if all the male wolves that were already brought over there were eradicated, and both the two males and the female Jurassic wolves were placed onto that island, you could definitely be certain that not only would these Jurassic wolves take over, their genetics would take over the Isle Royale's gene pool, but with their dire wolf traits, they would be much more efficient predators of the moose and be more reliant on the moose than ever before. So that's basically my theory on that. if you guys think it's an interesting scenario, comment down on link below. Comment in the comment section down below. But like I said, even though these wolves are not true dire wolves, they still are very fascinating and bring up a whole new world, like I mentioned before. And who knows? We might be these Jurassic wolves could be the first step on bringing back the real dire wolves. And and even as anyone who's ever followed Colossal can tell you that they did not mention they were going to do dire wolves of any sort at this time for all these years. It's kind of like that scene in Jurassic Park 3 where one character named Billy says, I don't remember that on InGen's list. And Alan Grant says, that because it wasn't on their list. That makes me wonder what else they're up to. I pretty much have the same feeling here. The direwolf wasn't even on their list that they told us they were going for. It makes me wonder, what else are they going to go? What else are they going to do? But even though these wolves are not real direwolves, they're still very fascinating and definitely has a lot of possibilities. And basically, they don't even fit the term I called them in the last video of dire mutts, because in order for that to be the case, they would have some direwolf DNA, and they don't even have that. But they're very similar to it. I would, along with being called Jurassic wolves, I would definitely call them direwolf mimics or honorary direwolves. So this is definitely going to be a very fascinating scenario. And and on a side note, how they modify these wolves reminds me very much of a YouTuber's idea. Keenan Taylor, who many of you know, who works on his project of Chimere. One of his main ideas for his science fantasy world is that a race of dwarf humans known as the first children often create these creatures known as homunculi. Now, how they're created is they don't really alter their slaves with the DNA of animals. What they instead do is to manipulate the homeobox genes to base the homeobox genes of their human slaves to be able to basically reprogramming them to grow or make something different. Like instead of growing human fingernails, they will grow the claws of a ground sloth, or instead of regular human teeth, they would grow the canine teeth and such of a chimpanzee, without really adding DNA from the respective species. They're basically reprogramming their DNA to do something different than normal. And of course, as you guys could tell, this is very reminiscent to how Colossal Biosciences have created their Jurassic wolves. However, regardless of how they were born or what they are, I welcome these Jurassic wolves, into our world. I welcome them to our world, and I hope that they would be a symbol for the bright future of all wolves, dire and otherwise. If you made it this far, thank you for watching this little Paleo Rant video. Of course, with this sort of thing happening, you gotta make a video too about this sort of thing, especially considering my channel's subject. Now, let's all be able to keep a close eye on Colossal Biosciences to see what else they're gonna do with these wolves or with other species. I want to thank Keenan Taylor for giving me permission to use one of his illustrations to pretty much help describe the whole thing. As well as many of you know, he's done a lot of work. He's done a lot of illustrations for my channel, and I thank him for that. So I'll let you a link to his YouTube and DeviantART page down below. I also want to thank you all, and if you haven't already, Please like, subscribe, and share a link to this channel and video. It helps me out a lot. And I hope you all have a grand day. Adios!